Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Stop-motion animation legend Ray Harryhausen is our guest of honor all this weekend as we celebrate his 83rd birthday this coming Sunday. Now, for those of you not familiar with stop-motion animation, it's a special effects technique that creates the illusion of movement on film. Typically, it involves scale models manipulated by an animator and photographed one frame at a time, with slight adjustments in the position of the model made between frames. When that sequence of film is projected at full speed, it appears as though the model is moving. Well, Ray Harryhausen is a master of stop-motion animation. And up next, we have something quite special. The first new film from Ray Harryhausen in over 20 years. It's The Tortoise and the Hare, an animated short that was 50 years in the making. Ray began the film in 1952 when he was still struggling to make a name for himself as an animator in Hollywood. To keep busy and to hone his skills, he began making a series of animated films based on children's stories like Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, and King Midas. Well, The Tortoise and the Hare was going to be the 6th film in that series. But before he could complete it, he was offered a job on a feature film. And he set aside the 4 minutes of material he'd done and never returned to the project. Well, 48 years later, 2 Ray Harryhausen fans, animators Mark Caballero and Seamus Walsh, found out about this unfinished film and asked Harryhausen to let them work on it. Ray agreed, and late last year, the men celebrated the completion of the film with a special screening and panel discussion sponsored by the American Cinematheque and held at the Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles. And we have excerpts from that discussion for you now. And then after that, the film itself, The Tortoise and the Hare, and it's a charmer.
Ray, what was the genesis of this series of animated fairy tales? What audience was it aimed at?
I made them directly for the schools, and I learned one great thing from them. I always call them my teething rings because I did learn a great deal by making the 5 fairy tales. And they were very simple to make. I tried to keep them as simple as possible. So I used 8-frame dissolves and extreme expressions. And I think it worked out quite well. But I did it in my spare time, and I did the 5 fairy tales. And The Tortoise and the Hare, I started and I shot about 3.5 to 4 minutes. And then I found monsters were much more lucrative. Certain stories demand stop-motion animation. And I've always felt that stop-motion adds this strange quality of a fantasy that you know it's not real, and yet it looks real. It's like a dream.
Now, Mark and Seamus, when did you first meet Ray, and when did you learn that there was an unfinished film project of his?
Well, we found out through a mutual friend of all of ours, Richard Jones, who had produced documentaries on Ray in the past. And Richard told us that Ray had this project there in the background that he'd always thought wanted to finish.
Now, did any of the models from The Tortoise and the Hare still survive after almost 50 years?
They were actually the models I had. They had been boxed for quite a while, and they seemed to be workable when I brought them out after 50 years. So they're the same models except for the tortoise. I had all the heads of the tortoise, but somehow I guess he crawled out of the garage or something because I couldn't find him afterwards. So Mark and Seamus remade the tortoise. So I was delighted when these 2 young men said they'd like to finish it. So I loaned them my original camera, the Cine Special, as well as the original puppets. Fortunately, they were all in pretty good condition. Rigor mortis hadn't set in.
Can you talk about recreating the sets, the amazing amount of detail that went into the background sets for Tortoise and the Hare?
Well, Ray had original footage that he shot in '52, so we had that to study off of, but we also studied all the other fairy tales. We limited ourselves to just that era. We just bombarded Ray with all these questions about like, how'd you build the trees? How'd you do the set? What were they made out of? You know, all sorts of stuff. So we really wanted to get as authentic as we can with this whole thing. So we went out to the Mojave Desert. We picked the little plants that we used for the trees and
50 years before, I had my father drive me out to the Mojave Desert to pick these little desert plants with small leaves to be in proportion to the miniature. And these boys found the same bush after 50 years.
It was a daunting task. Ray's style, of course, he's the master. We had trepidation about having to do footage that was going to cut up against stuff that Ray had shot. I always say it's like trying to copy somebody's signature, because you can get it close, but it's never quite there. So we did a lot of tests to try to conform to Ray's animating style of that period.
Now, did you have to use any special techniques or computer technology to blend the old footage and the new footage that you were shooting?
the film was in really good condition that Ray shot, but they're two different stocks of film. So we did have to do some digital tweaking just to blend it all together. We didn't want to make it all pristine or anything. We wanted to make sure that we matched the way it would have looked like in '52.
So we ended up adding grain and contrast to the stuff we had shot to try to make it look more like the old stuff.
I'm glad you didn't ask me the key question.
Which is?
Where did I leave off and where did they begin?
Ah.
I wouldn't have told you anyway.